This is Fatah Mosque in central Cairo. Right now, Friday prayers are taking place. It's one of the main locations that the Muslim Brotherhood have chosen to gather in for the million-man march that they've called for. They want to show that their will hasn't been broken following the government's crackdowns on their demonstrations.
On the roof, armed police are preparing to intervene. Tear gas, the crowd disperses but soon returns. Warning shots are fired. Then they fire at the protesters, causing the first injuries. Hours later, the mosque has been turned into a field hospital. The injuries mount. This man is between life and death. For many others, it's already too late.
We're in northern Kurdistan on the road to Syria, where there are many hundreds of internally displaced people demonstrating because they say they've received no assistance from the international community. There isn't even bread and water for them. Most of these people are Yazidis from Sinjar, where they've spoken of terrible atrocities being carried out by ISIS, executions on the spot. They've also accused the Peshmerga of abandoning Sinjar and leaving them to the fate of ISIS. This trial marks the beginning of a new era. It's the first time Muslim Brotherhood leaders have been tried since the ouster of Mubarak. Egyptian authorities are even considering dissolving the organization. So it seems likely that the Brotherhood will return to clandestinity, something which they've known for most of their existence. At this frontline Peshmerga checkpoint, we're only 5 kilometers from the village of Bashir, which has been taken by jihadists. The Peshmerga here tell us that there's fighting on a daily basis.
We leave the front line without hearing a single gunshot. But on the way back, things get complicated. Our escort is caught in a firefight. The attack targeted the Peshmerga minister's convoy, which was taking the same road as us. Reinforcements are quick to arrive. The Kurdish regulars have captured several assailants. Under covering fire, it's now time to withdraw. Once back at the base, the aggressors turn out to be members of a local Turkmen militia. The casualties, 1 dead from the Turkmen and 2 wounded from the Peshmerga.
Egyptian authorities are racing to remove traces of the Muslim Brotherhood's largest sit-in. It was right here in front of this mosque, Rab al-Dawiya, that the death toll was highest yesterday. Over 100 people lost their lives here. Across the country as a whole, it was more than 500. That makes it twice as many deaths as in the preceding 6 weeks since Morsi was deposed.
There's a completely different atmosphere outside the Al-Iman Mosque. Here families come to verify if the names of their loved ones figure in the lists of the dead. Inside the mosque, there's an almost unbearable stench. More than 200 bodies are laid out under white shrouds. Those in charge at the mosque say that these victims of yesterday's violence have not been taken into account by the official death toll.
Between Syria and Iraq, over the last few days, many thousands of people have used this bridge to flee to relative safety under the protection of Kurdish Syrian fighters. Most of them were Yazidis, some of whom had endured a days-long, grueling journey to get here. But some won't cross this bridge alive. In this ambulance, the body of a young man who died of dehydration in the desert. It's perhaps an irony that so many people are fleeing for safety to Syria, which is itself embroiled in a 3-year civil war, but that's an indication of just how desperate the situation is for those fleeing the violence of ISIS. Egyptian authorities believe the international media's coverage is biased, showing only the victims of government crackdowns. That's why they've brought us here to show us some of the other victims of this current crisis. I'm actually speaking to you from on top of Mosul Dam, which we were given an escort to by Kurdish Peshmerga forces, putting to an end the claims, counterclaims and contradicting reports of the last few days as to who's in charge here. We're on top of the dam itself, near the hydroelectric power plant, parts of which you can see behind me. There's no sign of any damage here, but there is evidence that a fight took place. There are 50 caliber bullet cartridges strewn all over the ground, and actually now I can hear bullets being fired in the distance.
Humanitarian organizations have built camps for those who were turned away.
This camp was established on Tuesday and houses some 300 people who either refused entry to Kurdistan because they don't have sponsors there, friends or family, or simply don't have the means to go anywhere else. For most of them, there's no question of returning to Mosul.
For more on this, let's bring in our regional correspondent Adam Pletz in Beirut. Adam, what's the latest you've been hearing?
Well, we have a few details as of yet, but what we do understand is that 4 Israeli soldiers were killed by an anti-tank missile that was fired at their vehicle by Hezbollah from the Lebanese side of the border.
camp. Now, this is a place where there were already extremely harsh conditions, to the extent that some people had died of starvation. And before the 1st of April, the UN was able to get some, even if they were meagre, supplies through to the camp. Since the Islamic State group's offensive, UN and other agencies haven't been able to get any supplies through to the camp whatsoever. So they've been calling for an immediate evacuation of civilians.
That activist was adamant they don't want Islamic fighters from abroad involved in their struggle. However, without further international support, they believe it's only a matter of time before Islamic militants become seriously involved.
Well, France 24, Adam Pletz is following events from neighbouring Lebanon. He joins me now live from Beirut. Adam, as we saw in that report, any talk of a ceasefire is really a very far cry, isn't it, from what's really happening on the ground in Syria?
That's right. I mean, the whole point was that there should have been a total cessation of hostilities from 12th of April onwards, and we certainly haven't seen that. As you heard in that video, there were isolated instances of shelling around Idlib and Aleppo provinces at that time. There's also been heavy shelling in Homs during the period of the ceasefire, and activists tell us that hundreds of deaths have occurred at the hands of the Syrian army since the ceasefire was implemented. As one Shia lady said to me, an ordinary civilian woman who'd come down to take a look at the damage of the bomb blasts yesterday, she lived nearby, she said to me, we, meaning the Shias, have been punishing the Sunnis in Syria, and now they're going to try and punish us back here in Lebanon.
Adam Pletz reporting there from Beirut.